Happy Sunday. Happy Sunday, friends. According to YouTube, it says we are live. So I see some people out there. Please let me know who is here today to make block 10 in the summer sampler. Let me know who is out there. We will get started right at the top of the hour. It is 7:59. So who is with us tonight? Please drop your name in the chat and tell me where you're from. All right, 8 p.m., right on the dot. I like to get started on time. Okay, tonight is block 10. So let me show you what block 10 looks like. As you guys know, I'm making this quilt in 2 colorways. So this is block 10. I love this block. Look at this block. It is so fresh and so cute. It is a double pinwheel, and that is what we are working on tonight. So Norma's with us, and we have Chris, and I see a few other people out there. If you don't feel like dropping your name in the chat, that's fine. But let me show you what we've got on the agenda tonight. So first, I'm going to show you guys the block that we're making tonight. It is block 10, which is a double pinwheel. You have this here that looks like a little whirligig, and you have this pinwheel in the center. And so for this particular block, I'm going to talk about color, because color is important for a block that has movement like this one does. And so one of the things I like to do is I like to use a color wheel when I'm picking colors. And so let me show you my color wheel, right? I bought it a long time ago at an art store, but a color wheel allows you to pick colors. One of the most common color combinations is this one. It's 2 primary colors, which is red and blue, which is why you see them together a lot. And those cannot be mixed with any other color. So they're a true primary color. And so I use this to combine, I use this color wheel to combine my colors. So for example, I want my block, my other block I'm making tonight that goes with my other colorway to be orange. I want that to be my base color. So if I take my color wheel and I see that orange is my base, I come out here, and this is called a split complementary, which means there are 2 colors that are adjacent to each other and across from my color on the color wheel. So if I do a split complementary, I'm looking at a purple and I'm looking at a green. Could be a jade green, could be a little bit of a muted green. So green, purple, and orange are the 3 colors that go together. So what I did for this block, orange was my base color. I pulled a purple, and I could use either this purple. And then for the green, I pulled this strip right here. So these are the 3 colors that go together. So I have this that's mostly green, and that's why I pulled it. It has some purple in it. I like how this looks. And so these are the jelly roll strips that I picked using my color wheel. And that is one of the hardest things for quilters to master, is what colors to pick and put together. So getting a color wheel is a quick, easy way to figure out what colors to use on your block. So these are the colors I'm using. And let me break the block down for you tonight. All right, does everybody have their handout? So this is our block tonight. It's the double pinwheel. If you notice on the block that I made already, I'm going to make it using rectangles. So this is a rectangle with an easy corner. This is a rectangle with an easy corner. And the same with this. This is a unit that has 4 pieces. This piece, a half square, this half square triangle here, and a regular square. So let me break this down. So for our pinwheel, double pinwheel block, you're going to need to cut the following. For this segment right here, you're going to need to cut a rectangle that's 4.5 inches. So go ahead and cut a rectangle that's 4.5 inches. You're going to need 4 of those. For this, I'm going to need you to use 4 2.5-inch squares for these right here in the corner. So this is 2.5 inches. And for this, you're going to use the easy square method for making these. So these are half square triangles. So you're going to need a red and a white that are 2.5 inches for these spots right here. So this is 2.5 inches. And so let me cut these up so you can see all of the pieces that we're going to need really quick. Okay, so let me set this aside. So in the original drawing, we had the pinwheel that was in the center. In this case, I'm going to make it out of the orange fabric. And so for that, I'm going to go ahead and cut, and this is folded in half so you guys can see that. I'm going to need 4 half square triangles that are orange with my background fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and put those together. And for me, for me, it's easier to cut them when I layer them. If you're new to rotary cutting, you may not want to layer yours. But I'm going to go ahead and layer this because I need to save a little bit of time. So I'm going to go ahead and lay those down, and using my 2.5-inch ruler and my bigger rotary blade, because the more layers you cut, the bigger the blade. And so I'm just going to trim that selvage off on both of those. And as you can see, I have 2 beige and 2 orange. And I'm going to go ahead and cut those squares that I need out of that particular fabric. And so I'm going to need a total of 4 of those. So I will just cut that twice. And so that gives me 4 of these for my pinwheels. I also need to add regular 2.5-inch squares to the corners. So I'm just going to take this right here, and I'm going to cut 4 of these. I'm going to add that to my pile. For my easy corners, I'm going to need 4 easy corners that go on my rectangles. So I'm going to cut this twice. I could have cut it all together. And so let's count what we have. I have 2, 4, 6, 8. So I have 8 orange squares, and this color is the color I'm using in the pinwheel. Right, so I'm using it in that pinwheel. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 little squares to go inside that part of my pinwheel. And then I have background squares. The next thing that I'm going to use is I'm going to cut the rectangles that I'm going to use in the blue pinwheel, or that secondary pinwheel. So for this, I'm going to cut 4.5-inch rectangles. I'm going to make mine for this block out of the purple. So out of the purple, I just need 4.5-inch rectangles. Now, people ask me all the time, do I use my mat for cutting? And I do not. I find that it's a lot more accurate to actually use a ruler whenever I want to cut something. And so I'm going to use a ruler. You set these aside. You can use a big ruler, a small ruler. It doesn't really matter as long as you have a ruler that works for you. I'm going to use a small square, which I use quite often. And I'm going to cut those 4.5 inches, and I need a total of 4 of them. So here's my jelly roll strip, and it's folded 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to get 4 cuts out of that. So I'm going to carefully fold that again so you can see. And I can give it a little press if I want. It's always a good idea to press your fabric before you cut. Give it a little press. Now let's see what we've got here. So I need 4.5 inches. But I don't want to waste a bunch of my jelly roll, so I'm going to scroll that down a little bit. And that's 4 layers thick, which means I'm going to cut all 4 of them at the same time. And a little bit more. If you guys have known me for a while, you know that I don't like wasting fabric. I like saving every inch of that fabric. So there we have it. I'm just going to cut a little smidge off the end. And I'm going to flip this around. And I'm going to line it up with my 4.5 inch over here and right across the bottom to make sure that it's nice and square. And I'm going to trim this side. So now I have 4 of these. And so this is what you should have so far. Hi, Carol. All right, I see people are trickling in. So now that we have our background squares, we have our pinwheel number 1, and we have our rectangles, I'm going to set this one aside because I'm going to use this for my outer sashing or border, whatever you want to call it on my block. So I'm going to use this green, what I'm calling my green strip, for the outside. So this is what I'm going to use for the inside. Okay, so how am I going to make an easy corner? Well, there's a lot of ways to do an easy corner for this section right here, right? I could lay that down and draw a line. That's one way. Or I could lay it down and I'll show you how to trim it before I sew it. So let me show you that method, which is a method that I like to use, and I use it quite often. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each of my easy corners, because these are going to be all the same, right? And I want them all to be uphill. So I'm going to lay them all the same so that I don't get confused. So I put them all in a row. And I'm going to lay my oranges face side down on top of those. Ooh, don't you just love orange and purple? If you're here with us, please tell me what your favorite color combination is. I love using orange and purple. I think those are the 2 most beautiful colors. But yours might be different. Hi, Paula. All right. So there we go. I have all 4 of these pieces. And if you notice, they go up the hill, right? So they're going uphill. And so at this point, if I wanted to, I could go ahead and draw a line on all of those. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this up, and I'm going to, with my eyes, I'm going to look at an imaginary line, and then I'm going to add a 1/4 inch seam past that line, and I'm going to trim off the excess before I sew. So Chris, you love blue and yellow. Yes, that is also an amazing color combination. So I'm going to lay these like this on their side. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to pretend that there's a line drawn from corner to corner. And that's one way of doing it. Then I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to take this 1/4 inch mark right here and I'm going to drop it right on that corner. Then I'm going to take the other 1/4 inch mark and drop it on the other corner. And then I'm going to cut this off. So what this represents is that seam line where I'm going to stitch, and then this is what is excess. If you want to see it better, this ruler is not the best for this. You can use one of these that has an actual like frosted 1/4 inch seam, and you can lay it right there. And as you can see, I'm dropping that right on the corner, right there, that 1/4 inch line. So that's my imaginary stitch line. And then this is a 1/4 inch this way. And I'm just going to chop that off. And so now when I sew, this is ready to sew. I don't have to trim it any further. And I'm going to do that to all of my pieces that I'm going to sew. And you can use that 45-degree line, however you want to do it. I just lay it right here. That 45-degree line should be lined up with the bottom. And then you drop that imaginary seam line corner to corner. That ensures that you have that 45-degree line you should have there. And I drop that over there. And so now when I sew those, I don't have to come back and trim them. I'm also not drawing a line, so I'm saving myself a step. So whenever I can avoid spending a bunch of time drawing and trimming, I do that. So I see Norma loves purple as well. I'm a purpleaholic. Prince was one of my favorite artists. I was really sad when he passed away. And so his royal purpleness was my favorite guy to listen to growing up. And so purple is one of my favorite colors, but it looks really nice with so many things. Purple looks good with red. Purple looks good with pink. Purple's just a delightful color. So here's an example of purple making a quilt block just looks smashing. So this is purple with teal, pink, green. It makes this quilt block really dance. So purple is one of my favorite colors. Look at that. Purple just sparkles in there. So I love purple. Purple, purple, purple. All right, so these are ready to go. And these I'm not going to discard. I'm going to save in a little pile because I can sew these together along this tall side. And when I open them, I can make a little hourglass block. And so if you don't get rid of those, you can sew those together and make a little hourglass block. So never toss your little corners because you can always save them for something else. All right. So let's go over to the machine and I'm getting ready to sew. So Norma loves purple. Chris loves blue and yellow. I like red also. Red is another very lovely color. All right, friends. I'm going to sew these from either side. I can go from the top to the bottom or the bottom to the top. My 1/4-inch seam is there. I use a 1/4-inch foot. Anytime that you have a machine with a 1/4-inch foot, use it. It makes it more accurate. And then you just sew to your heart's content. And then you assembly line sew. I usually sew continuously and I try not to break my thread. That reduces the chance that those little tiny triangle ends are going to get raveled up in your sewing machine because you see that happen sometimes where the machine just kind of eats that little corner. Try not to stretch that because that's on a bias. And don't even push it. See, I let my machine do the work. I just kind of guide the fabric. The less you can pull and tug on your pieces as they go through the machine, the better off you are. All right, those guys are done. And you should have a little string just like this. And now we're going to press those and we're ready to continue. So I have these little guys. And people ask me this a lot, and I'm going to say this again. It's probably a repeat, but I do not use starch on my blocks. Starch can attract little critters, and so I tend to not use starch. What happens when you have a big string like that? Be careful and just carefully trim it. Don't tug it because it can cause that seam right there to be weak. So I just check it. And if my thread gets tangled right there, then it does. All right, so these babies are ready. And I'm going to press towards the orange. And I don't even need to machine press. I could carefully just pat it because this is a bias. I'm going to not push with my iron too much because what that does is that actually distorts your block. And so one of the things that I like to do is I like to literally just drop my iron on there, and that makes a nice, perfect block. So if you look at it, that is just perfect. No trimming, nothing extra, ready to go. And so that is what I like for my blocks to look like. And so I don't push or pull or tug at my blocks. I simply roll that back, pat it down gently, and lay the iron on top. And if it ever looks like I'm pushing, I'm actually not. I'm just teasing the fabric into place. And so there's 2. And these should measure 4.5 inches. A good thing to do when you are a quilter is to check your subunits before you continue to the next step. That's just good practice. And then I have 3. And if you notice, these stayed fairly square. They're not distorted. And then I'm just going to carefully do the same thing, roll it back. Try not to distort it because I don't want that to get wavy on me. So I'm just going to lay my iron on there. And I just give it a couple of seconds and I leave it alone. And there you have it. And this one has a little bit of a bow in it, like this. And so while it's still warm, I'm just going to tease it right into shape. I'm going to press it down with my hand. You can use a clapper. I've even used my cell phone. Your cell phone gets quite warm, and so I've even laid my cell phone right on top of a block like this. So that works out just fine. All right, friends, these 4 pieces are ready to go. Now I'm going to need 4 half square triangles that have this orange color and the background. So I'm going to pick 4 of these, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put them with a background square. In this case, it doesn't matter because it's a batik, but you put them right sides together. With a batik, sometimes it's hard to tell. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pretend that there's an imaginary line that goes from one side of this block to the other. And I'm going to trim off 1/2 of each of these blocks so that I can put them in this section of my quilt. So these are these little guys. So we have 4. Same thing. I'm going to lay all 4 of these little friends right here. And like I said, you can use any ruler that has a 1/4 inch. I have this one here, this little mini companion angle has that 1/4 inch line right there. So if I wanted to, I could take this ruler and lay that little line from corner to corner and chop it off. So as long as that imaginary line runs right there, I could cut it off. So you don't even have to have a fancy ruler. As long as you have a ruler that has a 1/4 inch and that has the doggy ears nipped off. So this should be a little solid 1/4 inch on that side. And then, like I said, you can use any ruler for this. You can use this ruler, a square ruler, any ruler at all. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to move these over. I like to use one that has a 45-degree line and make sure that that is laying along that edge. It gives me a nice line of sight and ensures that my block is nice and true. All right. And so there we have it. Same thing, save these little guys for something else. Put them over here in a little discard pile. And now I'm ready to sew the next set. So I'm going to just machine chain piece these over here. Same thing. Use a 1/4 inch foot if you can. If you have one. and let the machine do the work for you. Never push or pull your pieces. All right. Today was a nice day outside. It was sunny here. Spent a lot of time hanging out with my adult children. It's nice when your kids grow up. Mine are learning how to cook, which I love. So they've been picking out recipes and running around buying ingredients. Learning how to adult is such a lovely thing. So when your kids are grown and you can watch them do their own things and become independent, that's always a happy time. All right. If you noticed, I put a little leader and ender instead of using my thread cutter because I don't like it when it chews up the end. So there we go. So now I have this little thing that looks like a laundry line. And I'm ready to go. And this block is almost ready to assemble. So it's 8:25 and we've already moved really fast. All right. So I've got this little guy here. We're going to trim in between these. Careful not to nip your blocks. I've done that before. I got in a hurry and chopped right into my blocks. So quilting has its hazards, so be careful with that. Same thing. I can press it towards the background, or I can press it towards the batik. And so one of the things that will determine which way I press is by looking at which direction I need to match this right here. So if this one goes down, then I need to make sure that I'm matching that so I don't have a lot of bulk. If you notice, I opened my seam there. And the reason I did that is because I wanted my pinwheel not to have a big lump in the center. And that's one of the things I always watch for. But in this case, I pressed all of my half square triangles towards the color and away from the white. And so in this case, my seams swirled perfectly. And so that's what I want you to do. So you're going to take these little squares right here, and you're going to take and you're going to press those towards the color and away from the background. Like I said, this, you have to be careful not to distort that little block. So you just barely tap it with the iron until it lays flat. And you shouldn't have any bunny ears to trim. So that one should be ready to go. 2.5 inches, ready to go. No trimming required. Same thing again. I'm just going to pull this back gently with my fingers like this, my 3 fingers. Just kind of hold it, lay the iron on it so that it rolls back that seam, and that's what makes a nice, truly square block without any distortion. So there's another one. And these go really fast. I like to sew, assembly line sew anytime that I can. Just makes it more efficient to sew several pieces at once, especially if they're all identical. I do not like to sew an entire quilt's worth of piecing though and put them in a big pile, because sometimes you can make a calculation error and you might cut your pieces wrong or you might trim them wrong. And so I like to sew maybe a few pieces at a time, maybe 5 or 6, then stop and check to make sure that I'm not cutting, hundreds of pieces the wrong way. All right, so there we have it. We have 4 of these rectangles that are 4.5 inches with an easy corner. I have 4 half square triangles, and I have 4 background squares. All right, so now I'm going to put my unit together, and my unit goes as follows, and they're all the same. I'm going to take one of these, and I'm going to lay this easy corner like this, because that's what's going to make my pinwheel. And so this is how this will go together, making sure that I match those points. And if you notice, that looks pretty good. And then I'm going to have one of these. So I have to put these 2 together. So in my case, what I will do is I will lay all of these the same direction. And I will lay this on top of all of them and sew on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and assembly line sew those next. Careful not to distort those. And so I'm going to go over to the machine and sew my entire little stack. Pick it up like this. Remember which side it is that I'm sewing on so I don't sew on the wrong side. And we are ready to continue. How's everybody doing tonight? Tell me what you're up to. What have you been sewing? Are you sewing the block or are you sewing something else? I'm pretty excited to put all of my blocks together. I think this is going to look really nice. And I'm going to use this quilt to go to the park with my grandkids this summer and just lay it out on the grass and let them roll around on it and have a good time. So my summer sampler is going to be used this summer. I'm going to be quilting it myself on my machine. So I'm either going to quilt it on my Bernina or I'm going to quilt it on top of my Brother PQ 1500. And so either one of those. You never know, I might get brave and try quilting on my treadle. I've seen several videos of people quilting on their treadle, and I'm kind of excited to try that. Does anybody have a treadle machine or experience using a treadle? I bought one at an estate sale, and it's in pristine condition. I love my treadle. I really do. It's one of my favorite things in the whole world. She has a name. Her name is Gertrude. So if you have a sewing machine with a name, you can tell me what your sewing machine is called. I have Bertha. She's my big machine because she's my semi-industrial. I have this little gal. Her name's Abigail. She was an anniversary gift from my husband. And I have Gertie, my treadle. All right. So this is what we've got now. So now we have these little guys, and we're going to open them up. And we are ready to assemble the unit. So this is going to sit like this. And this little guy is going to go right there. And so we're just going to flip that over. And we're going to sew that. And I'm going to let that seam go where it wants to go. So it wants to go flat, so I'm going to let it go flat. And so that's the block I'm getting ready to press. And so I need 4 of these. And I open it back up just to double check. And I'm going to lay it like this because this is the side that I'm going to sew on. And so I tend to kind of work in sections. I think it's easier to keep things straight. See, that doesn't go correctly. Did I sew those upside down? No, that's correct. No? Did that go the wrong way? What a tragic day is that? Do you see what happens? I should have sewed it on this side. It should have been like this. So now I'm going to have to use Jack the Ripper. So Carol has used a treadle. All right, friends, I'm going to have to use Jack the Ripper. Not my favorite thing to do, but here we go. Sometimes that happens to the best of us, right? Festivus for the rest of us. What do you do when you have to seam rip? Do you get upset? I don't. Happens to all of us. All right. Sometimes when you get in a hurry, you end up going slower than you wanted to, right? All right. I use my little embroidery scissors a lot of times as a seam ripper. And I just kind of pull it apart and give it a little trim. Sometimes I need to wear my glasses. And I need to make sure that that goes the correct way. That was a tragedy. Try to save some time and I end up losing time. So I'm going to lay that correctly. And I'm just going to do that. Let me make sure the rest of these are correct. And they're not. Sadness. So I just barely pluck it, just a hair, just one thread. I stick my little baby scissor in there and I give it a trim and I pull it apart. I try not to tug, but this makes light work of this yucky task. Everybody has this problem from time to time. Tonight is my night. That's pretty good. I got all the way to block 10 without having to seam rip. How about that? How many times do you have to seam rip on average when you make a quilt? I usually seam rip once or twice in a quilt if I'm not paying attention. Like tonight, I wasn't paying attention. All right. So what we got there. Well, 1 out of 4 was correct. How did that happen? It's one of those mysteries of the universe. You swear you put them the right way, and then all of a sudden they end up the wrong way. Nothing a little pair of scissors or a seam ripper can't fix. All right, friends. I almost fixed my problem here. Ready to continue. All right. So there we have it. Lay it the right way now. And if your block, if you ever seam rip and your block has those little holes and it looks distorted, just give it another little press and that should fix your issue. But I try to pluck the rest of the threads out if I can. And then I give them a little sew. So I just take my finger and I pull all those extra little threads out because what you don't want is to trap all of those in the seam and have a little thread sticking out everywhere. All right. And we continue. So pull those little threads out. What do you do with your threads? Do you put them in a thread catcher or do you just throw them over your shoulder? I just like to do this and then vacuum when I'm done. Are you guys thread collectors or thread tossers like me? You toss your threads? All right. Anytime you can use a leader or an ender, do that. All right. Woo! Fixed. All right, friends, let's see what we've got here. Are we ready for the next step? Let's check it out. Make sure we don't have to seam rip twice. Have you ever had to seam rip twice? I've not had that happen yet. So usually once I seam rip once, I'm done with that process. So I'm going to put these little blocks together. You're going to have 4 identical units that have half square triangle, a square, background square, and this right here. And so there it goes. He's ready to lay in there and sew. I have this guy, and that's the correct way. And that seam, I'm just going to finger press it the way it should go. And I'm going to pull all this extra thread out because I don't want those sticking out and getting stuck in that seam allowance where I use that thread. You can use an eraser. Some seam rippers even have a rubber bottom. I have one somewhere in my house. If you have one of those with the rubber bottom, it's easy to pluck those threads out. So never be ashamed of using Jack the Ripper, your seam ripper. I have a love-hate relationship with mine. I really do. All right, there we go. That one's now correct. Give it a little press. Tease it into place. Get rid of those threads with my finger like this. Pull them completely out and get ready to sew this little batch. Now, when you sew this, make sure that you are matching these seams. This doesn't have a bunch of intersections to overlap, but match those little seams as best as you can so that your pinwheels when you are done, look like a continuous triangle like these right here. And so that's always a good practice to just check your stuff before you continue and you sew them incorrectly. So in this case, it's going downward. I'll give it a little press. And then I'm going to put it on top of its friend, get rid of those threads. And I'm ready to go. So let me go ahead and give those a little sew. Look, we are finishing this block fast tonight. And this block doesn't have a lot of trimming. Some blocks are faster than others. This one has very little trimming. So we're going to go ahead and match that up. And give it a sew. All right, for those of you who registered for the virtual retreat, let me talk to you a little bit about what's happening. I've sent an email. You need to check your spam to make sure it didn't go into your spam. But I've sent an email with the agenda of what we're going to do during the retreat. So we are going to be making a pineapple blossom quilt. If you would like to join in that. If you don't, you don't have to. You can just bring a project that you want to work on, bring UFOs, and just hang out with us online. There's a schedule of times where I will be teaching each of the different ways to make a log cabin. So I'm going to be teaching people how to make a hexagon log cabin, a 60-degree log cabin, a diamond log cabin. We're not making an entire quilt. I'm just showing you how to make different types of log cabins. But I'm going to be working on a pineapple blossom. And I'm going to be making an entire quilt. And I'm going to demo that. So you're going to have a lesson on how to make Bonnie Hunter's pineapple blossom in the morning. And I'm going to repeat that lesson again in the evening for those who can't make it. So the retreat is on Friday, May 14th from 7 p.m. to midnight. And then again on Saturday from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. And so the point of the retreat is just fun with a bunch of people online and friendship. And hopefully you're going to finish your UFOs. And if you're interested, you can make the pineapple blossom. So I'm going to be showing you how to do that. So that should be a lot of fun. I'm super excited. I've already posted instructions on how to cut everything you need for your pineapple blossom. And so you should have that ready to go. Is anybody on here going to be making the pineapple blossom with us? If you cannot make the retreat, I don't want you to panic because I'm going to make a short tutorial video afterwards. But I have everything ready to go. So I have everything for the retreat in a box, labeled and ready to go. I'm so excited. I'm super excited. I am ready to make another pineapple blossom. It's one of my favorite quilts. It's a great way to use scraps, and it turns out so nice. All right, friends. So now that we have all these little guys, let's see, did that match? Whoop, whoop. That matches right there. I love how that turns out. And so I'm just going to take and carefully not distort that block, press them to one side. So careful. This should look like that because this is your 1/4 inch seam. So when I sew that, it looks like this. So if it looks distorted to you, and a lot of times new quilters will look at their block and kind of panic because it looks like this, don't panic. That's how it's supposed to look. So that guy is ready. Let's see the rest. After I went to all that trouble to seam rip, I hope they turned out well. You can set that seam if you want. And then roll it back and see what it looks like. And this is a yes on this one. That one matched perfectly. So I'm pretty happy there. See that? Point matched just the way I wanted it. And I have a 1/4 inch seam there. And so I should have 4 of these guys. And these are turning out nice. Look at that. Point matches, push it down, pat it, give it a press. Do not scrub with your iron. Push it down and leave it there. And then set it over here. The pineapple quilt has no background. It has 3 yards of blossom fabric. So the 3 yards is for the blossom fabric. The border fabric is 1.75 yards. So the 3 yards that you see listed on there are for these blocks right here. So this is what you need for the pineapple blossom. You need 184.5-inch blocks, and that's 3 yards worth. And then you need 2 jelly rolls to trim the rest. And so it doesn't use background. All right. Voila. 4. I'm ready for my next step. And so let me show you what this is. So these are my 4 pieces. I'm going to rotate these pieces so that my pinwheel meets in the middle like this. And I'm going to rotate that pinwheel upward. And then I'm going to rotate this one sideways. So each time it rotates. And then one more time, and there is my block. Now I just need to put it together like this. And I'm going to match these ends. And then this should nest. If you notice that right there, they go opposite directions. I'm going to lay that so that it nests, and I'm going to sew that using a 1/4-inch seam. Okay, I have a question from Chris. It says, what is blossom fabric? If you look up Bonnie Hunter's pineapple blossom, it is not made like a traditional log cabin that has a light side and a dark side, which we're going to be making a log cabin next time. So instead of having a light side and a dark side, all of your jelly roll strips are either medium or dark. And then the blossom fabric is the fabric that you sew onto the block to give it that pineapple look. So it's like a pseudo pineapple log cabin, but it's not a true pineapple log cabin. And so if you look on Bonnie Hunter's blog, you can see what I'm talking about. But that is the quilt that we're going to be making. I do a modified version of her quilt in that I do not put sashing in mine, and she puts sashing in hers. And so what that creates is a secondary pattern that looks like an Irish chain that's floating through the quilt. And in this case, I have a little extra to sliver trim off of there. Not cutting that 1/4-inch off, that needs to stay there. I like how that came together. And I have these 2 to sew. Double check so I don't have to use Jack the Ripper twice tonight. Hi, Joy. Welcome. You're not late, Joy. We are making this block right here. So this is what we're working on. And again, when I put that together, I put my opposites right here. And so if you press those towards the orange, those nest very nicely. I'm going to sew that side. And I'm going to show you something that I showed you last time, but it's worth repeating. And that is attaching your sashes on so that they won't wave on you. Okay, so let's look at this. So now I'm going to open this up, and it should lay just like this inside there. I'm going to flip it. This was pressed down, and so this should be pressed up. And if you notice, there's a lot of bulk here because there's 4 pieces and 4 pieces. That gives me a total of 8. So I'm going to make sure that that lays nice and flat. I'm going to finger press that with my fingernail. Careful not to distort it. So when you finger press, you take your fingernail and you run it across the seam like this. And that is a pretty good way to press if you don't have an iron while you're sewing. So now I'm going to take and I'm going to nest the center seam right here to make sure that those pieces meet in the middle. When I line that up, that lines up pretty well. So that means my quarter seam is doing what it's supposed to do tonight. I'm sewing with white thread on a darker color because I want you to see something. Okay. And so if you're a new quilter, this is always a good rule of thumb. And the rule of thumb is that you always press to the dark side unless it's going to create a problem for your seam. And in that case, you press in the direction that will reduce the amount of bulk in your seams. And so let's look at this. So if you look carefully at this seam, I have sewn, there's a stitch line this way, there's a stitch line this way, and when I stitched across here, I landed right at that crosshair. And when you do that, that keeps your seams true, and that keeps you from chopping up those points. So when that meets in the middle, I don't have any blunted points. But now look at that. See that seam? And it's really kind of poofy. I don't like a poofy seam, and I don't like a bulky seam. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip it to the back. And I'm going to see how one seam wants to go one way and one seam wants to naturally go the other. I'm going to take my finger in here, and I'm going to spread that apart so that that seam can go the direction it wants to go, and it'll lay flat. So I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to separate it just a hair with my fingernail. And then I'm going to press it down. And what that does is it creates like a little tiny little 4 patch in the middle. And now when I press that, it should press nice and flat. And so let's try that out and double check that. And there it is, nice and flat in there. And I like how that works. So anytime you can swirl that seam, and that keeps those little points from getting totally chopped off. All right, so now I'm going to check that my block is 8.5 inches square. So this inner block should measure 8.5 inches. So let's grab a ruler and let's double check that. I'm going to line this up so that I can make sure that it's straight and true. And I'm going to sliver trim this on this side and that side. So there's almost nothing hanging off of this. Just trim a little tiny bit off. And let's flip it to the other side. And let's check it. This has a nice line down right here on the 4 that gives me an ability to make sure that I'm straight and not trimming it crooked. And now I'm going to trim this side. It's a little crookedy. So I'm going to make sure that it's square and true. And so this side looks pretty good, but this side looks like it needs a little straightening. So I'm going to straighten this out. And that looks pretty good. So that took a little tiny wobble that had in there. And now I'm going to cut my outside border or sashing, whatever you want to call it. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, since this block measures 8.5 by 8.5, and I have trimmed it, I'm going to go ahead and cut 2 pieces, which are 8.5 by 8.5. And so I'm going to take this right here, and I'm going to trim off the selvage. And then I'm going to cut this 8.5 inches. I'm going to use my square up ruler that I just used. And I'm going to line this up so that it's straight across this line. And now, when you attach sashes or borders, I always sew with this piece towards the feed dogs. Why? Because this has less stretch than this edge right here. So this may have a lot more stretch. And so what I do is I lay it down, face down on this side and face down on the other side, just like that. And I sew a 1/4 inch seam with this towards the feed dogs. And what that does is it reduces the amount of stretching that happens on the edge of my blocks. And so I have less distortion. So if you have noticed any of your blocks that have a wobble when you attach the border, that's because one of the 2 pieces got stretched, and normally it's those block pieces that are pieced, right? And so I just take and I sew those with the sashing fabric to the feed dogs. So I line this up, holding it from the ends, matching this one and this one. You cut the exact amount that you need, and then you're going to sew. And I let my feed dogs take up the fabric. I don't pull or tug. And I just barely kind of tease it with the balls of my fingers so that it goes where it's supposed to. I make sure that that edge is lined up. And then I hold it with those seams up so that I make sure that the seams lay flat when I stitch it down. And then I'm not chopping off points. The other thing is I don't want to chop off any points. Same thing on the other side. I'm going to lay my fabric so that this sashing fabric is towards my feed dogs, and I'm going to give it a little sew. Now, for your sashing or your border, you press that before you add the next block. And you're going to see that when we sew log cabins, I'm going to be talking about pressing these so that you don't distort them. So now we open these up and we press toward the sashing. And so let me show you what that looks like really quick, just like we did all of our other blocks. And Chris, if you want to get in a messenger call with me later, I'd be more than glad to help you so that you've got everything you need for the retreat. But I have posted information. So if you will go to YouTube, there's a video called Getting Ready for the Retreat, and I show you everything that you need to cut to make your quilt. So there you have it. I'm going to roll that out, and I'm not going to push outward because that can distort that right here. So I'm simply going to take and I'm going to pat it down like this. I'm going to pat this down, like that, carefully running the ball of my fingers on there. Then I'm just going to press it flat. And the reason I do that is because I don't want any wobble whatsoever in that block. So I don't want waves or wobbles in these side pieces. And so now I'm going to take this, and it's going to be slightly bigger than what I need, which is fine. And then I'm just going to use my scissors. You can use my little scissors, my big scissors, and I'm going to chop that right at the fold line right here. And I'm going to lay that right here, centered, and I'm going to sew with this towards the feed dogs, and the same thing on the other side. All right, so there we have it. We are almost done with this block. It is 9 o'clock. Wow, this block goes fast. I'm thinking about making an entire quilt out of this block because I think it's very pretty for a quilt that's like a red, white, and blue. So if you want to make a patriotic quilt, I think it would be nice to make an entire quilt out of this, but I'm not sure. Maybe. Maybe, just maybe. When you sew those outside sashes on there, careful not to chop your points off. It's easy to do when you have a pinwheel, is to chop your points off. And then that can lead to tragic little blunted pinwheels. All right, and I didn't chop it. Yes! Isn't that a happy moment when you open your piece and you didn't chop anything off? Same thing. When I sew, I'm going to be careful. You see right there, that 1/4-inch seam. I have to be careful with that one. That one's kind of skimpy, so I'm going to have to remember that and not try not to chop off that point. So anytime you're doing this, be careful with those intersections. People who've never made a quilt before have no understanding of what we go through to have a finished product. Quilting is truly a labor of love. And if anybody ever asks you to make a quilt, I suggest you have them price the fabric, because people don't understand just how much fabric and time and love and money goes into producing a full-size quilt for somebody. And my quilts are always acts of love. I give them to people I care about. So if I care about you, I'm trying to make you a quilt. All right, so let's look at this block right here. Let me show you what I've got. Same thing. I'm going to press that flat. I'm going to take this one and press it flat. Then I'm just going to carefully roll this back like this and check that seam. I'll press like this so that it's a true 90-degree angle and not wobbly. So this is where geometry class was very helpful. Of all the math classes I took in school, geometry has proved to be the most helpful. Algebra, I might use it from time to time, but not too often. I don't use linear equations in everyday life, but I do use geometry. And this makes a beautiful, beautiful block for a quilt of valor. Absolutely, Norma. So if you look at this block, this is really nice. So like my other block was red, white, and blue. And this one is made with Batiks. If you notice this, if I were to do an entire quilt out of these, I would make these opposite. I would make these red on some of them and blue on the others, and I would alternate my sashings, make half of my sashings blue and half of my sashings red, because I think it would make a smashing quilt of valor. It would be really nice with background sashing in between. But there's the block. I'm going to trim it up, and it's looking really nice. I'm happy I pulled out my color wheel tonight to pick out my jelly roll strips. I think that it makes the block really sparkle. And so if you're not sure how to combine your jelly roll strips, I suggest you use a color wheel. You can look one up online for free. So you don't have to buy one. You can find one online for free and use a color wheel, but color wheels are very helpful. So the things that I use most in life are geometry and art. So whoever is still in contact with their old geometry teacher in high school, tell them you appreciate them. All right, friends, we have buzzed right along tonight on this one. And I'm trimming up my corners. Whenever I trim my corners, I like to use a bigger square. And that enables me to line up. See this line right here? It has a diagonal. It allows me to line up with this square. That way I know when I'm trimming this, right? And I've got that line up right here, that I know that I'm trimming it so that it's nice and straight. All right, friends, that is it. That is the block tonight. It's the double pinwheel. This is mine in the Batik colorway. I love how this one turned out. I love how it turned out using the red, white, and blue colorway. It reminds me of a firecracker. So have a great evening. I hope you have a wonderful week. I will see you next Sunday. If you have questions about the retreat, I'm available through Messenger. It is 9 o'clock, so I'll be available until 10. So if you want to get a hold of me, I'm going to be posting things to my Google Classroom for in the morning for my students. So give me a ring on Facebook Messenger and I will respond. If you are not my friend and you haven't sent me a friend request, send me one so that we can chat on Messenger. That's a great way to reach me. All right, friends, have a wonderful week. This week is Cinco de Mayo, which is why I'm wearing my cute little shirt. It is not Mexican Independence Day. That's a fun fact and trivia. Look it up. Have a wonderful week. You guys are awesome. Don't forget to send me pictures of your blocks. Send me pictures of your blocks. Have a great night.